There are a number of problems and challenges in providing value with analytics. For example, if the analytics department is constantly receiving requests for data and statistics from different departments that have no impact on the business, it might not have the capacity to focus on the more important questions. Fortunately, there are a few ways these problems can be addressed.
In this lesson we'll discuss two main things. The first is about whether or not HR analytics is big data analytics. In the second part we'll discuss a 2015 paper by Rasmussen and Ulrich, who note a number of pitfalls that HR analytics practitioners are prone to encounter. And of course we'll explain how to avoid them. Let's start with the question whether or not HR analytics is big data analytics. There are various definitions of big data, but all of them include the following three criteria: variety, velocity, and volume. Variety refers to the sort of data that you're working with. Does all your data fit into rows and columns in Excel? In that case, your data is very structured, especially when everything is numerical. Now, when you work with text data, it's often less structured. Examples of fully unstructured data are email, subject lines. These examples are often used in organizational network analyses, for example, when you want to see who's talking to who and which departments are communicating to which department. But also think about internal chat communication. These are all examples of unstructured data. They don't fit into a row and column structure like you're used to in Excel. Now, HR Analytics has the potential to do both. Next to your email data, you also have performance reviews, and these are usually unstructured qualitative data. In that sense, HR Analytics has a high degree of variety. The question is, does it also have a high degree of velocity? What you see happen in HR Analytics is that people work with batches of data. They make an export from two different systems, combine that data and then analyze it to find new insights. Streaming data, for example, is very rare in HR Analytics, and it's something that makes your analysis usually unnecessarily complex. It's not like you are downloading Twitter streams where you have thousands and thousands of messages a minute coming in. I remember reading somewhere that on average 3 data points are changed per employee per year. Unfortunately, I don't remember the source and I haven't been able to find it, but the number represents the speed of change of HR data quite well. In fact, I expected it to be even lower based on my own experience. HR data is very static. So the velocity of your data is very, very low, and the velocity that's required to qualify your data as big data is not really present. Now, the third main criteria for big data is volume. In big data, we're not talking about terabytes, we're talking about zettabytes, about very, very large quantities of data. And this is also not the case for HR. If you have a file with 2 gigabytes of data, you usually already have quite a lot of data. The volume of data that we're working with in analytics is rather small. So, in conclusion, I am sorry to tell you this, but with 1 or 2 exceptions, HR analytics is not big data analytics. When you talk about HR data, usually people refer to it as small data. It has a high variety, but hardly any velocity and quite a low volume. I hope you didn't get too bummed out when you realize that you're not working with big data, but you're working with small data, as they call it. Some people say there are more criteria to big data. For example, someone says value. Value is also an important factor. And if we consider that, then HR data also has value because the financial returns of doing HR data analytics can be quite large. But all in all, we're not engaging in big data analytics. So here's a director saying, let's solve this problem by using the big data none of us have the slightest idea what to do with. And I think that really captures the essence. It doesn't really matter whether we're working with big data or small data. It's about the value that we can create with this data. And although HR analytics is not big data, we are able to create a lot of value when we do everything right. And that's where the article of Rasmussen and Ulrich comes in. They wrote an article titled Learning from Practice: How HR Avoids Being a Management Fad. And in this article, they write about a number of problems that HR analytics as a discipline is facing and how we should deal with these problems in order to effectively solve them. And what they're saying in this article is that if we, in the HR analytics discipline, don't start to solve these problems, HR analytics runs the risk of being a management fad. And a fad is a short-lived craze. It pops up, everybody talks about it, nobody understands what it is, and in the end it doesn't add value, so it dies out. The first problem they mention is a lack of analytics about analytics. What the authors mean by this is that there's not much proof in literature that HR analytics is actually working and is adding value to the organization. The second problem they note is a data fetish. This is the idea that more data is better. And the authors warn for this because you shouldn't focus on data, but you should focus on informed strategic decision making instead. Data is just a means to make a better decision. And that end result is important. The data itself is also important, but it's only important as a means to a bigger end. And this is in line with their third point. Make sure that you have a business mindset. They take the example of someone who did turnover analytics. And this analyst collected the data, crunched the numbers, and in the end was able to predict which people had the highest flight risk. But then managers never really used the data. Now you probably ask, why? Well, because turnover wasn't a business problem for this organization at all. The academic mindset of let's solve something that's interesting is risky. You shouldn't fall into the trap of solving problems that don't add value to the business. The fourth problem they mention is that HR analytics often takes a push approach instead of a pull approach. So what happens is that HR thinks something is important, or even worse, something is interesting, and they start pushing this information towards the rest of the business, instead of listening to what the business really needs and then solving that business need. Now Rasmussen and Ulrich say that HR analytics should really focus on solving business problems, not solving the things that they might think are interesting, because they usually are not business problems. And the last point they make is that HR analytics is often not strategic enough. It's very operational, but should instead focus on the top priorities of the business. If HR analytics isn't doing that, we can just as well stop, because it's not adding value. The first solution is to always start with a business problem. This helps analytics to focus on adding value. Second, take HR analytics out of the HR department and put it somewhere separate so it can operate independently of HR. Now this is something that not everyone agrees with. Later in this course you'll hear Linden having a very different opinion. But Rasmussen and Ulrich say that the HR analytics department should operate independently of HR because this enables the analytics department to focus on the top priorities of the business instead of doing smaller jobs for the HR department, which are interesting, but they run the real risk of not contributing to the rest of the business. And that's something that I've seen myself in different companies all over the world that are really focusing on operational HR tasks, like getting reporting straight, and that's very narrow HR reporting that's interesting for HR but not really for the rest of the business. And the HR analytics department has the task of focusing on those kinds of projects. Those projects don't contribute to the rest of the business. They might seem important, but they are not really important. And according to the authors, the only way to really solve this is to put the HR analytics department outside of HR. Now the third point they make is to not forget the human in human resources. In the end, we're talking about people, and neither people nor organizations are rational. Analytics can help, but analytics don't go all the way. And that's also something you'll learn much more about during the rest of this course. The final point they make is that you should train your HR analytics professionals to have an analytics mindset. To establish analytics within an organization, you need an analytics mindset in all your HR people, especially in your business partners. If HR professionals are able to work with data, the results of your analytical efforts will be much greater. These are the main points that Rasmussen and Ulrich are making in their paper. I included it in the reading material because it's a really practical article, as it points out the pitfalls that you want to avoid when you get started with analytics, and it gives a number of pointers on how you can solve them.